Hello, everyone. Welcome to the latest issue of Comic Book Gentlemen, the podcast where we take the most divisive issues in our fandom and discuss them. I'm your host, Greg, joined by my constant co-host, Dave. How's it going, Dave?
Very well. How are you, Greg?
Very well. So yeah, you guys will have noticed from the title of this podcast, we are here to discuss Dawn of X. Jonathan Hickman's run as head of X, which is a really rad thing to put on your business card.
Yeah. Yes, I'm the head of X.
Could you imagine meeting this guy, not knowing who he is, and handing you a business card, just head of X? Oh man, that'd be so cool. So basically, where we're at when it comes to reading level, you are just finished X of Swords, Ten of Swords.
Just finished that, and I've read the first two graphic novels of Reign of X.
Exactly. what I kind of been doing was just finding the ones I liked, and just following those. So you were the madman who decided to try to read
It was a lot.
Yeah, I know. I tried that at first when they were doing the Dawn of X thing. I tried to follow all of them. I got maybe 5 issues in, and I was like, nope.
It was especially hard with the ones that you're just really not interested in. To stay involved, and it always seems, I don't know what it is about them, but it's like the ones you're least involved with always have the most dialogue.
Yeah.
Always have the most to read.
The longest read.
So it was, but it was a slog for sure.
So we're gonna definitely talk about it. I also had a bit of review. I read Hellfire Gala, and I read Inferno, which was basically the end of Hickman's reign as head of X type of thing. So point of this podcast is we're going to discuss, how did we get here? What did we like about Jonathan Hickman's run? What didn't we like? And where do we want to go from here moving forward? Obviously, there's a lot of books that have already come out since Hickman has kind of stepped down as head of X. But there's still potential for a lot of stuff the cool stuff that he's set up to happen and whatnot. So let's start off with the very beginning. I know we won't go every single detail of X-Men history because there's a lot. But Dave, what was X-Men like back in the day, the heyday?
Back in the day, the first time I was kind of introduced to the X-Men was actually Fall of the Mutants. It was Fall of the Mutants, and then that moved into the first Inferno, which was, I think, my first taste of I was heavily into comics at that point, reading comics, collecting comics. That was my first X-Men event.
Wow, that's a heavy one to get into.
Was the Inferno, and of course, really heavily involved Mr. Sinister, who was by far my favorite X-Men villain of all time. And it was just it just kind of built from there. I kind of jumped on and off of X-Men here and there, just depending on who was writing it and what storyline they were going through. But there was Extinction, there was all these various different storylines that led up to it. But it's always been a comic that I've especially during the events, I came back to read and check out and see what was different and what was going on.
Yeah, I think if you look at the history of Marvel, X-Men's always been number 2. The X-Men titles have always been number 2. I think one of the things that really attracts people to X-Men is it's such a diverse group of characters.
Yeah.
A lot of people like Spider-Man, but not everybody does. Whereas with X-Men, there's always going to be a couple X-Men characters you're going to gravitate towards. So there's a reason to keep reading, right?
Yeah.
Even if you don't like, say Nightcrawler, you may be a big fan of Wolverine, or you may be a big fan of Storm, and it keeps you going. And like you said, it always had something new and interesting happening to keep you reading, type of thing.
Yeah, and it was if you want to look back on a lot of what's happening now with, say, just looking at diversity, I remember the first kind of shift of diversity was the giant-sized X-Men, where they introduced Wolverine and Thunderbird and all of these X-Men. That's when Nightcrawler and Storm were first introduced. Sunfire, all these characters from all around the world, different cultures, different backgrounds, different just different ways of life, all coming together on one team. Was probably the first time I remember seeing anything like that in comics. Yeah.
And I think the other really cool thing about just mutants in general was the idea of anybody could be one. And it was always the cool idea of if I had a mutant power, what would it be? And what would be the cool? And it always had this really cool potential for anybody reading of putting yourself easily into that world, type of thing.
Very simple.
Yeah. And I think the really cool thing about back in when it first came out / up into the 90s was, you know, X-Men were kind of taking over. Mutants were supposed to be the next wave of humanity, and there's always, you know, ebbs and flows about how influential they are on the wider Marvel universe and whatnot. To the point, it was one of my favorite X-Men runs is actually Grant Morrison, where his whole theme of his run was basically like X-Men one day, mutants one day will just take over. And it's just gonna be like he played with time a lot of like, you know, what's gonna look like in the future, what, you know, what is in the present, and how are we growing to that point. But then it built up to the point of where you hit House of M.
Yeah, there were too many mutants.
There's too many mutants then, right? Like you got to the point now where it's like if we don't change the status quo of X-Men, it's just they're just going to take over the entire planet.
Yeah.
So then you have House of M, one of the first Marvel crossover events. Maybe not the first, sorry, but like one of the blueprints to modern day crossover events, I guess is what you could call it, right? Because it was like Bendis on it. He just had this crazy idea to kind of change the status quo, and it was an epic story that involved almost everybody in the Marvel universe, and like you'd have to read, you know, multiple characters to get the whole story. But then you end it with Scarlet Witch going no more mutants,
Right?
Which then decimates the entire mutant population and drastically changes the trajectory of X-Men and mutantdom in comic books, right? So what was your initial thoughts coming out of House of M talking about
you know, coming out of House M, I was happy because it was an amazing, I thought, an amazing crossover series or just mini series, whatever you want to classify it as. Just because it was such I thought it was a very creative way to reset what was the norm at that point, and especially regarding the mutants, it was getting to that point of like, especially being an old school X-Men reader, where it was like, yeah, there were enough mutants, but for the most part, they certainly weren't the majority, and they were, you know, very very much of that mold of. We're hated, but we try to save, you know, everybody. Like, it was just that was the shtick that they were built on.
Yeah.
And then leading into Morrison's run, where he kind of shifted that a lot, and moved it in a different direction. I was ready for there to be less mutants.
Okay.
So when they did that, I was like, okay, cool. Like, yeah, let's take it down a notch, because there were just so many.
See, I actually disagree with that. My favorite part about X-Men was when they would introduce a new mutant, and then you'd have to go, okay, what's their powers? How are they going to fit into the current mutant system? And, like, are they going to go good? Are they going to go evil? What's their relationship with humans? Like, I was a really big fan of Academy X, where they had a whole new class of young mutants, and it was just trying to figure out, how do I use my powers and whatnot. And in my opinion, like, House of M, which is cool to do the whole No More Mutants, it was huge, it was amazing. But then after a couple of years of like, because my biggest issue with it, the mainstay mutants stayed. Like, you still had Cyclops, you still had Wolverine, you still had Jean Grey. It was the new mutants. I mean, admittedly, there's a bunch that nobody cares about, but a lot of them, like, you just cut off that potential, and they cut it off for a long time. Like, it was probably, because I think House of M came out around 2005, and then they didn't do AVX until 2015? No. 2012?
Yeah,
something
I
like that?
think it was that late. Yeah,
2012. So almost 10 years of this era of the X-Men being, we're just decimated.
Yeah.
And then if you had like so many storylines of like, there's only like 50 of us left, and like, what are we gonna do to survive? And like, and they had some issues with then.
I didn't mind the introduction of New Mutants, because I mean, it's not a different thing. I mean, they did the same thing back in the day with the X-Men, like when they introduced, you know, Kitty Pryde, or they introduced Rogue. Like, they would introduce like a new mutant, you'd get to know who they were, then you get to know their power sets, and then they would either add them to the team, or they, you know, it was kind of like a trying out period. Like, are they going to be good or bad?
Yeah.
Oh, okay, they're going. Which team are they going to? And they would go to a team, and that was it. And occasionally they'd come along with a new, you know, mutant bad guy, or, you know, whatever they would come along with. So it was always. There was always that introduction. I just found with Morrison's run, it went from like, hey, we're introducing some mutants, to like, oh, I'm going to take you into this, you know, this city full of mutants that you've never heard of, and there's just so, like, the sheer number of them was so overwhelming. It was like, okay,
which is fair.
Yeah. But it was an interesting way to curb back, if that's what they were looking, you know, if they were looking at doing that, and then kind of setting and moving forward from there. I thought it was creative. Whether they hit it or not, moving forward from it or not, I mean, that's debatable.
Yeah, so definitely subjective a little bit of how you enjoyed it. But basically, this era of X-Men's whole storyline was, like I said, there's only a few of us left. We're on the brink of extinction. How are we going to survive? Then you start leading into Messiah Complex, and that's when you get introduced to Summers, Hope Summers. Thank you, which is the most it's the most obvious name of all time. So there you go. But then
we wouldn't try there.
No. So then you have Hope Summers, which is the potential for new mutants coming in again. And then you had the whole AVX.
Yeah.
So point of AVX was supposed to be like the mutants found the Phoenix Force is coming back, and it's going to empower Hope in the sense of like there's a chance that it could bring back all the mutants. Right. But then of course the Avengers are like, bro, the Phoenix Force, man, kind of sketch. Why?
So bad.
So bad. Why are we doing this? Like,
and unless Echo's using it.
Oh, that's fine. No, that's fine. No, that's okay. That's okay. Not the mutants. Fuck the mutants. Yeah, exactly. So, right. Then you get AVX, but I think what happened with AVX, it was like a combination of AVX of not the critical reception of AVX was a little bit negative.
Yeah.
Plus, this is when the MCU was kicking off, and Disney didn't own the rights to X-Men.
Yes.
So I think you got into this issue of they were gonna start leading towards mutants coming back and X-Men coming back as a bigger thing, but then because of these external factors, they then were like, nah, let's keep mutants still at the bottom. Yeah. And then they started to push like Inhumans that nobody agreed with.
Yeah. Which is funny because Inhumans was like an early, like right around the back in the heyday of these comic books coming out. Inhumans was actually a very early introduction of characters to the Marvel universe, and it didn't work then.
No.
I mean, and there are going to be people out there that are like, I love the Inhumans, and I thought the Inhumans worked really well with within the Fantastic Four world, but like on their own, it was just like it just felt like, oh, so they're mutants,
basically.
Like, are they not mutants? So it just never
clicked.
It never clicked.
And I think it's one of those things too, where it's like even if mutants weren't being pushed as much because of how long-standing these characters were, people had such like long-term love for most of these characters. Like, Wolverine's one of the number one characters of all time for Marvel. Like even Professor X and Magneto are some of the two most iconic people. I was avoiding it. But but like Storm, Nightcrawler, Colossus, like these guys are literally like some of the top superheroes in Marveldom. So to them to try to push them to the back was such BS.
Yeah.
And it was just like, okay, what do you guys? But then we get to the point of, I think it was 2019 when House of X Powers of 10 was coming out.
Yeah.
And the other good thing, again, what happened externally is suddenly Fox gives up the rights to X-Men.
Yeah.
So now Disney's like, hey, we got, let's push them. Let's do what you want. So now they get Jonathan Hickman, who at this point in his career had come off like a crazy Avengers run where he kind of reset the entire Marvel universe. Amazing run. Did Secret Wars, which again reset the entire Marvel universe.
Which was on par. I'm not going to say for those nostalgic older readers that it was better than the first one, but it was better than the first one. Just because of the overarching story was so much more involved rather than just going, hey, I'm going to collect some good guys and some bad guys and put them on a planet and make them fight. That was the whole premise of the first one. So again, a great, knocked it out of the park.
Yeah. So then you introduce House of 10's Powers of X, and the whole point of House of 10 Powers of X was just to re-establish where are the X-Men now, and what are we doing moving forward. And you and I have talked multiple times on this podcast about how much we loved Hawksbox. Like I think in our 2020 top 5, both of us had it on our list or something like that. Like, because it was good. Like, good. I think like what were the things you loved the most about Hawksbox when it came to reestablishing the X-Men universe and whatnot?
It was different. Yeah. It wasn't just like, hey, we're gonna go back to the school, and we're gonna train mutants, and we're gonna save humans.
Yeah.
But they still don't like us. And we're just gonna redo the same shtick that they've been doing for years and years and years and years.
Yeah.
It was a big reset, and what I really appreciated about it was a comic that I felt like didn't really have like a climax of like, hey, like, oh, this like fantastically amazing ending where something big happens in the sense of like a character dies or something's introduced. It felt like it was just like this is a bridge event to kind of set up what's going to happen going forward. So even though there were like I thought one of the most climactic parts of it was when they attacked went in and were trying to stop the creation of Nimrod, which was I think like episode or issue 3.
Yeah,
and they
like
all
that.
get like decimated while they're trying to take this thing out. And I just thought, like, for a bridge or a setup series, to catch my attention that well without wowing me with a major revelation or event, I was very curious because like, okay, now we're taking this in a really different direction.
Yeah, like I think the really cool part about it, like you're saying, like it not only introduced like it's new, but it also kind of reestablished where X-Men was kind of going back like 20 years ago type of thing.
Yeah.
Like they've established themselves now as a real force on the planet. They're part of like the UN. They're their own people. They have their own language, own nation, own everything. And it's just like, okay, now how does that really affect the planet?
Yeah.
And like, of course, there's going to be Orcus, which is like, and all the other mutant haters coming out of the woodworks to come to like F you guys type of thing. And then you had like, my other favorite part about this is the fact that it brought all the mutants together. Like, because that was always the other thing is like you either had Magneto versus Xavier or Magneto and Xavier together versus Apocalypse or together versus Sinister. And this is really like, no, we're all here. Like we're all on this quote unquote same team coming to party.
Yeah, it was interesting. It was interesting when it kind of came to fruition, and this is what it is, and here's the council. I felt like in some cases, like for instance, I don't think Sebastian Shaw changed.
No,
he was still an a-hole.
Yeah,
he was still looking out for himself at the end of the day. Like his character was like within the confines of being a part of Krakoa and being a part of the council, he was still himself.
Oh yeah.
Whereas I felt like Magneto had already changed.
Yeah.
Like he changed a while back, so that was not a big deal. But Sinister, I felt like he was always nuts. So yeah, why not throw him in there? Like why wouldn't he? Why wouldn't he think, yeah, this is great. I'm gonna join in on this. But characters like Apocalypse, I felt like they weaned him in the sense that like this is Apocalypse. Like the guy that has been threatening to like end you all for such a long time, and he's sitting at the table, and now he's like just giving in to like it just. I felt like it took some of the villains, some of the punch out of who these characters were, and others it made perfect sense because within even the comics that they were being written in, they remained the same to the core. Yeah. So it was like they were still their selfish evil selves, but just quietly
in the background.
in the midst of this thing saying, okay, how can I use this to my advantage?
See, I think that's what's good. Like, I mean, I admit the whole Apocalypse thing was he, like you're saying, he's kind of the biggest one that changed out of all of them.
Yeah.
But I think we'll kind of get into that more with X of Swords too. Is like you could see kind of like they were planning his storyline for a while, and maybe it didn't pan out as well as we would have wanted, type of thing. But I think, like you're saying, how Sebastian Shaw and Sinister work within Krakoa was interested, and the fact that they stay the same. I also think that's really cool about the whole Dawn of X, or whatever you want to call this era, was the fact that they've done like a mutant nation before, but this was felt like a way more established mutant nation.
Yes.
You know, like you couldn't just. I mean, admittedly, like if you read like X-Force, they go on the island all the time and kill people, but like it felt so much more impactful than like Genosha or like a couple of the other.
Yeah, they didn't have Genosha. It wasn't a supposed to be a place that was already there that they just took over, or it wasn't a giant chunk of asteroid M that landed in the ocean and they were just living on that. Like it wasn't. It was the island itself is a mutant. It was truly its own thing.
Yeah. So Hickman establishes, sets everything up. This is the status quo, which I think is really cool. Like, and you could do so much within that status quo.
It's very interesting.
So now you have the Dawn of X, where you have so many different mini storylines, but they're supposed to all kind of be interconnected. So this to me was interesting because I feel like this is something that is way more common with older comic books like storylines. So like for example, Spider-Man had Amazing Spider-Man, but then you also had Web of Spider-Man, and then you also had Spectacular Spider-Man, and they all kind of intertwined, but they were all supposed to be their own separate story type of thing.
Yeah.
And then similar with X-Men back in the day, you had like regular X-Men, you had New Mutants, X-Force, all that stuff. And I feel like they moved away from that in modern comic books, where it's like you kind of have your own established storyline, and you don't mix unless it's a big crossover event.
Yeah.
Whereas I felt like with Dawn of X, it was supposed to all be interconnected, and like kind of like with the way I read it theoretically was wrong, where I just picked what I liked and tried to stick with that, whereas you were the madman who tried to read every single issue, which is I feel like how they intended it to be read.
Well, and I think that's where I had experienced it. Like I had read the X-Men comics, like I read the first, I think it was 6 or 7 issues, and I was like, huh? Because there were so many references to things that were going on in the other comics, and vice versa. If you read the other comics, there were references in the other side. So I really felt like, okay, in order to really understand where they're going and what they're trying to do here, I'm going to have to read, in all honesty, a bunch of X-Men titles that I never read before, like such as New Mutants, never read it. Obviously, Marauders never existed.
Yep.
So there were a bunch of titles that I'd never read before or didn't exist, to really get a grasp of the whole thing.
Yeah, so I like I said, the way I read it was I kind of just picked and choose what I wanted to read, and I think the idea of having it all be interconnected would have been cool, and if the execution had been a little bit better. I found what I ran into a lot was I'd be reading X-Force or Marauders, and they have a really cool storyline that I'm following along, and then they'd either end it really quick because they have to go move on to something else, or it would randomly get interjected, like paused.
Yeah.
Because suddenly something else is happening in another comic book. Like I remember one of the first times I noticed this was when I was reading X-Force, and they're establishing like this is our Black Ops unit. We're doing stuff that technically is illegal based on Krakoan law, but then suddenly Xavier gets assassinated, and you're like, this is huge. Like, what is this? But they don't talk about it in X-Force. It's in a whole different comic that they address it and they deal with it.
Yeah.
So then the next issue of X-Force was just, hey, we dealt with it. And I'm just like, what happened? Guys, back up.
And this is what I found was like after reading through all of Dawn of X, every issue, was that you could have got away with, like, if you really wanted to, like, I just don't have time to read all of this, you could get away with reading X-Men, X-Force, and Marauders. And the only reason you would have had to read Excalibur is for X of Swords or Ten of Swords. That's the only reason you would have had, is so that you knew what was happening leading up to that.
Yeah.
Outside of that, like as far as the New Mutants, really didn't have anything to do with it. Cable, not really. Like a lot of these other the other offshoots really didn't have anything to do with it. Nothing major happened in those that, they might reference it, but it wasn't really important.
Yeah.
Right? But yes, I could see, like, if you're just reading X-Men, and then all of a sudden they're talking about Xavier being dead.
Yeah.
Which happened in X-Force, but they didn't address it in X-Force.
Yeah.
They addressed it in X-Men. Like, it was, I could see how somebody be like, what the hell's going on?
I was very confused.
Yeah.
And that's somebody who's, like, in the world, like, trying to read it all. I was still confused, like, what's going on. So, like, so what's your opinion on it as somebody who, read when that was more common style of writing, of, like, intertwined books? And then now you read all of Dawn of X. Like, did you enjoy it, or did you find it was a kind of an aged technique that you don't think they should keep doing?
No, it worked. What I think the issue, and maybe it wasn't an issue, maybe it was planned this way, but a lot of the times when in the olden days of comic book writing, when they reference these things, it was like they would reference it, but chances are you're probably reading that comic, or it was just like, oh yeah, I know of it. I don't read Avengers, or I don't read that. I know of it, but it's not having like that much of an impact of what's going on here. Whereas I found their crossover was like, yeah, you definitely need to read these. Like, there's no question about it. There aren't any numbers on it. It's not Dawn of X 1, 2, 3, 4.
No,
as far as the issues, it was just like, this is X-Men issue number 2, and I have no idea what the hell's going on.
Yeah.
Because something happened in X-Force, and I don't read X-Force, or something happened in Marauders, and I don't know what that is. So they definitely entwined it a lot more. Which was, I mean, it's good and bad. I mean, if you're a huge diehard X-Men fan, you'd be reading them all anyways. But for just the person that's like, yeah, I like X-Men, but I'm not a big fan of like some of these other characters, and you're not reading those comics, it would have been near impossible for you to be understanding without going in and reading on, Wikipedia or the internet or finding somebody, YouTube video or something to explain what the hell was going on for you to follow along.
And I feel like the only other people who were happy were the sales and marketing team.
Yes, absolutely.
Because I wonder how much sales boosted in the fact of like nobody wanted to read, like Angels or whatever it's called, but then everybody had to just to see what was going on or whatever that was called, or Excalibur. Probably the only reason Excalibur lasted as long as it did is because you had to read it.
It was, and I have to say, like, through the entirety of Dawn of X, like I said, if you read X-Force, X-Men, and Marauders,
you're probably fine.
You're good. Like that was enough. The Excalibur I'll throw in there just so you know what the hell's going on in X of Swords.
Yeah.
So you have a little bit of like backstory or some information as to what was leading up to it. But outside of that, the other ones were like only read Cable if you really enjoy Cable. Only read
specific characters.
Those New Mutants if you really enjoy New Mutants, because they really they had nothing to do with the overarching story.
So, Dawn of X, initial Dawn, I think it lasted, a year or something like that?
14 months.
14 months, something like that. So then it all leads up to the first major arc for the new era of X-Men, which is Ten of Swords.
Ten of Swords.
Which, the build-up for this event and the description of this event, I was hyped. I even asked you, I was like, so for people who don't know, basically Ten of Swords was supposed to be, there's an alternate dimension of mutants. So like the current X-Men and whatnot are on Krakoa, but then back in the day, half the island got cut off when Apocalypse was in charge, called Araco. And they got split into this alternate dimension that's all psycho and like if you're not willing to kill, you're gonna die, type of thing. So really
you're gonna war and fight for 1,000 years.
Exactly, which is rad as hell. So basically the point of it is that somehow the I think it was Apocalypse kind of opens up the bridge because he wants to go find his kid and wife. And then what happens is the Iraqis want to cross back over, right? Or something like that.
Yeah, so they're now coming into Otherworld, or they had already started coming into Otherworld, and started taking over various aspects of Otherworld with the intention of like, okay, we're going to take over all of Otherworld, and then we're going to come for Earth, or that reality
back
or dimension
home.
Or whatever you want to call it. That's what they're doing.
So then the Queen of the Underworld, Saturnine or something like that. Basically decides like what I'll do is I'll set up a tournament and just get the Iraqos versus Krakoans. They can duke it out and then hopefully they'll not my problem anymore type of thing. And she was obviously doing a lot of maniacal stuff in the background, but but that's the basic premise of Ten of Swords is it's a 10 on 10 sword fight to decide the fate of new mutants.
Basically multiverse,
which is insane. Like the idea. And I even asked you recently, has there ever been a tournament arc in Marvel or comics in general that you can think of? Because in manga and anime, it's a very common trope of the tournament arc. So I was curious if like there'd ever really been a tournament arc in...
The closest thing you could call to a tournament, which wasn't really a tournament, would have been the very first Secret Wars, which was like, we're going to pit a bunch of good guys against a bunch of bad guys. Randomly selected from the Marvel Universe, and then they're just going to go at it. And that was going to determine the fate of the universe kind of thing. But like it was not a tournament style thing. It was just like,
chaos.
Hey, let's go beat up the other side.
That
was it.
Yeah, so what was your feelings going into Ten of Swords? Did you hear any hype about it, or were you kind of like...
No, I was, like, when I saw it, I was like, okay... honestly, I was a little skeptical at first, because I was just kind of like, okay, they're gonna use swords. Like, okay. I don't know what these... Like, of course, some of the swords are iconic and have been around for a long time, and then other ones were just like... I mean, the first poster art, you saw, like... Cyclops with what looked like a lightsaber. Like there was a whole bunch of stuff that was like, what the heck? Iceman had a sword made of ice, and it's just like, okay,
cool, good for you.
So I don't know where suddenly swords became a thing, but let's it's an X-Men event. Let's see where it's going. Like there wasn't really, I didn't hear much about it other than it's going to be a big fight.
Oh, really? Okay. Yeah, which, I mean, again, that's kind of what it was supposed to be. Just like, hey, cool mutant versus cool mutant, let's see what happens. And, like, the cast they were growing, too, was really interesting. Like, obviously, you had, like, Wolverine, who's a mainstay. You had Magic because of course she has a magic sword, type of thing. But then you had randoms like Cypher, ready to go, and like Storm got a sword from Wakanda, which is rad as hell, type of thing. So a really interesting eclectic group of mutants. But then you kind of get into the event.
Yeah.
And again, the event, which makes sense, ran similar. Actually, it's not. It is a little bit different than like kind of modern events in the sense of there was no main storyline separate book. Like like when Civil War came out, there was Civil War 1, Civil War 2, but then you had all the branches off. It wasn't for this where it's like Ten of Swords 1, Ten of Swords 2. They were all spread out amongst each individual novel type of thing.
Yeah.
So I think the idea of that's cool because it's like, oh, I got to collect them all.
They've done it before. Like they did it in the Messiah Complex. There was basically a Messiah Complex issue 1 that came out, and then all of the issues following that were, Uncanny X-Men, all of the X-Men comics, and it was just like, this is part 2, this is part 3. So they've done it before. I think the big thing for me going into it was when I first heard that was going to be a 22-part crossover, I was like, did they not learn their lesson from AVX?
Yeah.
Because AVX was 15 or 16.
Yeah.
And that was too long. And especially with all of the crossover stuff that was going on in the Avengers and everything else, like the common complaint about it was it was too much.
Too long.
It was too long. There's too much going on. And I think AVX kind of like really just found or just crossed over that threshold of like too much. They were right there, and then it's like the Ten of Swords, they were like, hey, let's add an extra 6 issues to this.
Oh, great.
Yeah, and make it great. And my biggest issue was like not the biggest issue, I said some of the issues that I had with it was like the tempo was like, and pacing was just so off. Starting with they're going around, there's going to be a tournament. Okay, so they introduce they introduce the bad guys.
Yeah.
Okay, so we got to stop this. We're gonna have a tournament. This is what's gonna go on. We, here's these cards. There's riddles as to who these people are that have to fight in this thing. So they start to introduce the characters going to get their swords, and this lasted for, I'm gonna probably say, 6 issues.
Yeah.
Because of them going and like, okay. Storm goes and gets the sword from Wakanda, and Wolverine goes through his trials to go get his sword. Like there's all these steps. I was like, okay, so they're building this up, right? They're getting these swords, these very powerful swords, or these iconic swords, and then they get to the tournament part, or they're in Otherworld, and then the pacing just completely freaking changed again, and it was like, okay, so what? Why?
Yeah, what's going on?
What's going on? And I think in this case it was a question of definitely too many shifts in the kitchen. It was just too much. Too many people writing dialogue. Too many people involved. There was obviously an overall plan, but there was just individually in each of these comics there was just like too much control by whoever was writing those comics to take it in whatever direction they were taking it in.
Yeah, and I think this kind of really reflects kind of Hickman's run as head of X too, where it's like he starts off with a point A, and it's like, okay, eventually I'm going to be in point. We're going to end this arc or whatever you want to call it at point B. You guys do whatever you want in between that. Is kind of what it feels like his kind of leadership was in that way. And I feel like that was the same issue with Ten of Swords, where it's like, I'm going to set up this really cool concept of sword fight, 10 on 10, let's go. And eventually we're going to end with, the end result, but you guys do whatever you want in the middle. Yeah. And because of how different voiced the authors were, that's how crazy the arc ended up being. It's the reality of, even all the individual comics were very different too. Like, you had the very serious X-Force, Black Ops, all this stuff, but then you had, Hellions, which is just a comedic relief insane thing, type of thing. So when you're reading Ten of Swords and it's supposed to be this epic tournament battle, but then you go from serious sword fight to something like a pie eating contest. It was like, what?
Yeah, and I think that was the disappointing part, was there was this build up, and it was I was already as they were collecting their swords, I was already okay, so somehow I'm building up in my mind. I'm like, okay, somehow somebody okay, of course Wolverine's gonna win.
Yeah,
he'll lose. Oh, okay. And then I bet you something like, oh, Cypher can't even fight. Somehow he'll pull it out.
Yeah.
For the team. Like they're gonna do some
Yeah.
some bait and switch kind of stuff here. And then they get there, and then the contest like is partially not even got anything to do with the swords.
Yeah.
They're not fighting with them. They're not doing anything with them. And then a lot of the tournament was literally one panel of them showing a picture of something happening, and then it just saying Araco 17, Krakoa 2.
Yeah.
It was just like, okay, so I get like one picture of what's like, and this is where, like, again, the pacing was just like, you built it up, like they went through these trials and these hard things and broke really really rubbed relationships the wrong way in the case of like Storm and Wakanda. Wolverine literally went to hell to go get a sword. Like you went through all of this stuff to watch Cypher get married.
Yeah, what was that?
Like it was just like I don't I don't understand. And I know there was a lot of I was reading some earlier kind of not reviews but prep for this, and there was like, oh, you're not ready. You're not ready for what's going to happen in X of Swords. And I was like,
I mean, they were right, technically.
They were, because I'm shocked that this is what we got. Like, it was just such a letdown.
Yeah. And the other thing that really let me down, too, was, like, how cool some of those Araco mutants were.
Yeah.
Like, oh, man, their designs, their character, like, what they could do with their powers were just so insane. You're like, this is going to be such a sick fight. So let me...
Not to mention.
Yeah, go ahead.
Not to mention, like... We're building it up here. So you've collected all these swords. You've gone through all this hell. Oh, by the way, when you go to Otherworld, if you die, we can't bring you back.
Yeah, which is huge.
Okay, so now I'm going into a tournament where I'm going to have to kill this other person, or they kill me, and if I die, there is no coming back.
Dunzo. Which
so
is
it's
complete
like
revert of.
It's just really and if we lose, oh, by the way, we're going to be invaded by this force from Araco that's going to just destroy everything.
Super mutants.
Like, okay, we've built this thing up, and then it's a pie eating contest. It's a you're getting married. It's an arm wrestling contest. It's a like, what?
Yeah. So here's another pitch I have for you for manga and anime. So like I said, tournament arcs are very ingrained, especially in shonen manga and anime, which is basically like it's just anime made for young boys, is what shonen means. But it's one of the biggest categories of manga and anime. So basically, how most tournament arcs work and why they're so intense is like been watching the show or reading the book, and you're with this one character or a group of characters for a long time. Like, for example, the X-Men. And so you're like, okay, I kind of know how their powers are, and I kind of know how their characters are. So like my prediction for like, okay, they're gonna go in the tournament. How are they gonna do, and how are they gonna win? Like Cypher's weak, he's probably gonna lose, whereas Wolverine's like the guy, so he's probably gonna win, or it's gonna be like this crazy fight. And so what they do in tournament arcs, they'll introduce an opponent, and the whole point of this battle is to figure out what they want to do, like what's their motive, what's their fighting style, what's their power, and then how does your favorite character kind of counteract that. It's kind of like the whole point of it, and then you kind of build up, and usually what happens is like your main character kind of learns and builds up throughout the tournament to either become a better person or / a fighter, or to lose in the end and hopefully learn something from it, type of build up from that. And they're usually like, I mean, some tournament arcs are better than others, and type of thing, but usually they're very epic. You get like crazy, like sometimes like characters have to like suddenly learn something new about their powers, like if I turn it up to 11, I'll blow up the entire stadium, type of thing, which happens multiple times. It's amazing. And so this is kind of like what I'm picturing for tournament arc. You're gonna have like Wolverine versus this other guy. They're gonna have to feel each other out. It's like, okay, he's invincible to my claws, so how am I gonna take him out? Or like he's gonna go like, oh, Wolverine can drown, so I'm gonna suddenly summon like water or something like that, and like very like kind of like chess or like real life fighting, where it's supposed to be like poking, prodding, and trying to find the weaknesses to then stab. And like some tournaments are very much like you don't die, you just lose. So at least like the stakes may be a little bit lower, but then it's always like, oh, I'm fighting for my family, or nobody believes in me and I'm gonna finally pull it out, type of thing. And like obviously these stakes are different in the sense of like you could die, or the whole world's gonna get destroyed, type of thing. So those stakes are very different and much more serious. But usually you have like, and then again you get introduced, like there's so many tournament arcs where you get introduced to a new character like on the other team, and they immediately become a fan fan favorite because either their personality is great or their design's great or their powers are amazing, and which I feel like could have happened with a lot of the Iraq immunes.
Yeah.
But again, then you get into Ten of Swords. And it's nothing.
No.
Like, could you...
Like, there were, like, as far as the tournament was concerned, there was, like... Unfortunately, there was a lot of letdown, but there were a couple positives. Like, I did appreciate the fight with Wolverine in the sense that, like, Wolverine won, technically. But then it was... Then you know, it was the wording of the... Like, the winner of the match will fight to the death. Mm-hmm. And it was like, well, no, the other guy won because he died. He actually fought to the death. Yeah. And it's like, oh, okay. Well, I thought, okay, that's a good play. I like that. I liked that. And I did like the spin on or not the Gorgon fight was just amazing. Like you can fight me when you finish fighting my thousands of of warriors kind of thing. And then he's like, yeah, okay, sure, and just starts cutting through them. That was great. Yeah. Like that was another example of like, okay, this was interesting. But then on a flip side, you had like these incredibly massive letdowns of like, okay, you're gonna kill a kitten. Or you're gonna you're gonna arm wrestle, you're gonna foot race, and it's just like, what has this got to do with the
consistency,
swords?
right? Yeah, no consistency.
Like, no, it was like and I can understand like maybe there was an attempt because Otherworld's a little whimsical to have like a little whimsy in there, but it just didn't land.
It didn't land with the tone that was promised. I think especially like, could you imagine if every fight was like the Gorgon fight? Which is basically like, what's your power versus what's my power? How do we match up? And like just fist fight. And obviously the Gorgon one again was a little bit shifty in the sense of like the only reason they won is because of like technicality, type of thing.
And I did like the fact that in some cases they were like, okay, round one's done kind of thing. Mm-hmm. Okay, round two. Okay, well now we're gonna have Wolverine and Storm.
Yeah.
And you're going like, what? Wait a minute, we're on the same team. It's like, yeah,
sure.
This is a big tournament. Doesn't matter. And I was like, okay, that's kind of cool because it's not just going to be this team against that team. It's going to be everybody. Mm-hmm. So you could end up eliminating,
which would be cool.
One of your own people out of the tournament, and maybe that person would have been the better option to move forward, kind of thing. Like there were some elements there that were like, ooh, this could be good, and then it was just they had the majority of it just be nothing.
Yeah, very sad. So the end result of Ten of Swords is basically shenanigans happen behind the scenes. The tournament means nothing, basically.
Yeah.
Apocalypse reconciles with his wife and family.
Well, this is what killed me about it. Is like at one point Wolverine kind of goes to a couple of them and says, "Look, I'm gonna take out Saxony.
Yeah.
I'm gonna take her out because this is just crap, right?" And they're like, "Yeah."
Do it.
Right? So he does. But then it goes to this like apocalyptic world of like, see what you did? Because you did this. So that's again further leading to the point of like this group of people coming for you is so powerful that if you don't win this tournament, because they are bound to this tournament, if you don't win this tournament, they'll just destroy everything.
100%.
So you don't kill me because this is what's gonna happen. Oh, okay. Then you go through the tournament. And then at the end of the tournament, they just basically go, screw you, we're attacking you anyways. And it's like, well, what the hell is the point of the tournament?
The point? Yeah. Yeah, I don't know. Because isn't it like they get somebody to attack Saturn IX's people, so then, or like the Krakoans and the Rakans had to like work together to fight a third force was basically what happened? Or am I misremembering?
No, it was basically Apocalypse's wife, who, like, and no big surprise, was wearing the helmet face mask of annihilation.
Yeah.
Like, ooh, what a shocker there. She's wearing that, and she got beat, but then she's like, no, I'm gonna put the helmet on, and we're gonna go at it anyways.
Yeah.
And she just attacks them, which just kind of like, well, why didn't she do that in the first place?
Yeah.
Like I did, like maybe she was just like, we'll win the tournament anyway.
She just assumed,
Like, I don't know, but it was just like, it was such again, 22 issues of this to get to this point, and I really felt like myself, I felt like it could have been 4 issues, and it could have been a like primary Excalibur mini series kind of thing with some tie-ins from the other ones, but it could have been summed up in like 4 to 6 issues.
Well, even like you and I were talking about before the podcast turned on too, was like one of the best parts about Ten of Swords was Hellions, which had nothing to do with the tournament.
No.
It was literally just Sinister going, hey, while they're busy go sneak onto the Araco place and steal me something like that. I don't know. Didn't he lie to them or something? It's like we're gonna go like gonna have. Like,
we're gonna go steal the swords.
Yeah.
The whole plan was I'm gonna take this force. Well, first of all, it wasn't I'm gonna take this force. It was
100%.
like we're gonna send a force in there. We'll send my guys in there.
Yeah.
And they will go get the swords. They'll steal the swords before they can get their swords, and then there won't be a tournament.
Yeah, genius,
right? So then they're like, yeah, okay, you're going with them, Sinister. You know, and Sinister's like, well, I didn't mean me.
Yeah, come on.
No, you're going. And then again, it's not very clear. Was it him? Or was it one of his clones that ended up winning? Because they play rocks, paper, scissors to figure out who's gonna gonna go.
Yeah.
And it was just like those two issues that, again, to your point, had nothing to do with the overall plot, were probably two of the better issues of the entire run because they were just, it was comical, it was fun. They ran into some like mutants of all mutants, like these mutants that were mutated, were experimented upon, and then they get into this big fight. It was just like that was good. The art was good, the writing was good, it was funny.
Yeah,
and
nothing to do with
the rest of the story,
which is great.
Yeah.
So again, end result of Ten of Swords is basically Araco and Krakoa make friends, and they bring Araco to Earth, and it's like, okay, let's try to reconcile.
Well, they kind of cheat the system in a way because Apocalypse takes out his wife, removes the helm, and then puts it on himself. And then surrenders. Because the Annihilation just wants to fight. That's all this entity wants, is just to fight. Let's just kill everything and have a lot of fun. And it was like, okay, so all of this fighting, they took the helm, he puts it on, and he's like, okay. And then Saturn is like, oh, okay, yay, you won. Kind of thing. It's like, okay. But you gotta swap prisoners. You gotta swap people. And Apocalypse, of course, you're watching it and you're going, okay, Apocalypse's family's here. Of course it's going to be Apocalypse going from the Krakoa side. And then, him pulling the fast one and saying, well, the mutant I want to go from here to there is Araco. Which is basically, okay, if we send in the island, you're sending millions of mutants over there too. Mm-hmm. So, and Saturn's like, oh, well played, Apocalypse. Like, jeez. Like, it was like I said, it could have been shorter. It had some highlights, and there definitely was room for a really good story here that just didn't materialize.
But now you have, again, another game-changing point on the map, right? Which is basically like all these crazy Arakan mutants are now on Earth, plus interacting with the new Krakoa mutants. Plus, it's increasing the level of mutants on Earth, which is obviously going to send off a bunch of red flares.
Yes.
So now you have the next era of X-Men books, which is Reign of X. And it's supposed to be like, okay, what are we supposed to do with the Aracos? Like, what's the plan to deal with them? From what I've read, they just ignore it. Mm-hmm. And they don't address it whatsoever. And I'm just like, what? Until you get to Hellfire Gala. So have you read Hellfire Gala at all? So basically at this point in general, Hickman's kind of head of X, does Ten of Swords, sets up Hellfire Gala, and then he kind of announces like, Inferno's going to be my last thing, which was surprising because it was supposed to be his huge plan that reshaped X-Men.
It played out to the secret wars of the X-Men. Kind of thing.
But however, I actually researched this, like kind of what went along behind the scenes. Apparently what happened was people enjoyed the toys he gave them so much that nobody wanted it to end. So they told Hickman, like, we're not letting you essentially like finish the way you wanted it to finish.
Worst decision
ever. Which is debatable, but yeah, it's because it still has potential.
Because like I look at it and I go, okay, so he gave a little bit of free reign. He had this vision of a story arc, and then they said, yeah, we're about halfway. We're actually not even halfway through. We're in the beginning cusp of the first third of this thing.
Yeah.
And people really like it, so we're just going to keep it going. And they're like, oh, okay, well, who likes it? It's like, okay, all of the, and I'm sorry to say this, but all the B-list writers that are writing under you, that are writing all the other titles, they're going to keep playing with it. And it's like, okay, but But Hickman's the one that is like, I've got the cachet here. I'm the one that built this thing. I'm the one that was brought in to, set it on a path and create this kind of Avengers type event that would get the X-Men back where they belonged. And now you're going to turn it over to these writers that have, like, I went through all the writers of all the comics, and I'm not saying they're bad writers in their own right, but they've done nothing to the level of a Hickman or a Claremont or like any of these other people. And these are the people that you're turning it over. And I very much felt like the X of Swords, like, even though it was a Hickman event, was very much influenced by Teenie Howard and what was going on in Excalibur, because really it had nothing to do with the New Mutants. It had nothing to do with Wolverine. It had nothing to do with X-Force and all these other comics. It was about that. So it's like, you've got these writers who are still like, again, time will tell. They're establishing themselves, taking the reins over top of a guy who's already established himself.
Yeah. Which I think...
which, to me, makes zero sense.
Well, to be fair, part of the point, like, I think that's something that held back Marvel for a while, is they kept staying with the same people over and over again. Like, Bendis was always in charge of the crossover events. But then, like, when they started branching out to, like, Hickman and, Ewing and a couple of the other guys, that's when they started getting even more notoriety, type of thing. So I think there is, potential for letting new writers come up and try their hand on it. But I think the problem is, like you're saying, is the proof is in the pudding.
Yeah.
Like, Ten of Swords was not that good. No. Everything, before that and after that isn't that good. So why...
And if you look at the sales, like, I mean, everything's always based on sales. Yeah. I mean, that's a direct correlation to how popular something is. Your Excalibur comics, your New Mutants comics, like, all of them outside of X-Force, X-Men, Marauders at the beginning that then waned off. Hellions seemed to be quietly popular.
It's so good.
Right? Because I just don't think I think by the time it came out, a lot of people were like, yeah, I was took on those last two X-Men comics. I'm not going to read this one.
Yeah.
And they should have, because it was really well done. But it just, like, you have the proof is there. These people haven't established themselves. They haven't done anything that has just, like, nailed it.
Yeah.
And the current stuff that they're doing right now, I could see if the current stuff they were doing was, like, top notch, like it was in the top 25, top 50, but it wasn't even in there.
Yeah.
And then you turned it over to them.
Yeah.
And you can clearly see that like, whether this is written anywhere, like, in my opinion, you could clearly see where Hickman started to either lose control or lose reins or go, you know what, like, this is just off the rails now, because you got, like, this group of writers over here is just kind of really doing their own thing, which is very frustrating, especially when you're leading into an arc or something that leads into a like a mini series or some kind of an event, because I hate when they have a story going on, and we were talking about this too. It's like, you're 3 issues into, 6 issues into a comic, and they're building a good story, and then they have to go, oh, hit the brakes, we got Ten of Swords.
Yeah.
And they got to run off to go do that. Like, it's just a mess.
Yeah.
And it's unfortunate, because when I heard Hickman was coming on, Hoxpox came out, the beginning, Dawn X, it's building up, okay, it was interesting. This is a new direction. I'm curious to see where he goes with this.
Yeah. Because
the Avengers run, like, as much as everybody's like, oh yeah, this was the greatest thing ever, there were some low points where people were like, what is he doing? But by the time he got to the end, it was like, oh, I got it. And that's what I wanted to see. And now it's like, you're not going to see that.
So I know you haven't read it yet, but I'm gonna spoil it a little bit for you.
I've read enough about it.
Yeah, because kind of like what you're saying, you could see where Hickman was kind of like, I'll just end my part of it, and you guys do whatever you want. Mm-hmm. So you had Hellfire Gala, which is basically like, okay, what are we gonna do with Arakko? What they do is they terraform Mars, which again is the most Hickman thing to do. He just takes an idea and goes like, turn it up to 15. Like, nobody ever pictured mutants on Mars. Except for Hickman. He's like, this is perfect. And the way he does it too is so cool. Instead of just like planting a seed and it just terraforms a planet, he combines like so many different powers. You have Magneto, you have Iceman, you have Jamie Braddock, who gives birth, which is really weird, type of thing. Like, he uses the cool ideas of all these powers to then reform this Earth Earth, this planet. And of course, not only does it have, like implications in the mutant verse, you also have huge implications on Earth. Because of course you have Orcus going, holy shit. And like even Captain America was like, are you guys sure you want to do this? Like it seems like a really bad idea. And then you had all the space people who are like, wow, they're invading on our territory. Like huge things. And again, my issue with it is that huge thing happens. And maybe it's just I'm not reading the correct comics, but it felt like it ended up being not that impactful. Like, maybe if I was reading X-Men Red or something like that, it would feel more impactful, but...
It didn't end up being that impactful because they undid it with Judgment Day.
Yeah, which happens, after
how insulting in the sense of, like, you just put this together. Now, they may, somehow rebuild it or whatever. But it's just like, you just put this in place, and then you just, you have another writer come in and just go, I'm going to scrap that.
Which is insane.
Yeah.
Because you had this crazy... world-changing event, and they're like, forget about it. It's like, what? So then, even before Judgment Day, like you're talking about, the last thing Hickman does is Inferno. So the point of Hoxpox, the biggest, like, key point of it was Moira McTaggart, to reveal that she is a mutant. Her whole power is I live multiple lives, and the futures I've lived in are all shit.
Yeah.
Everything
Mutants
sucks.
are really run down.
We're fucked. So her whole plan is I'm going to finally build a mutant nation. And we're going to do it this way. But we're going to establish rules like you're going to kill any AI you run into. Destiny and all precogs cannot exist because they're going to fuck, especially Destiny, because she's literally going to come murder me. And like just so many rules, but like Xavier and Magneto keep it secret from everybody. So the point of Inferno is that Mystique is like, fuck you guys, I'm getting my wife back.
Yeah.
She reses Destiny. Moira immediately is like, holy shit, she's gonna come for me. There's a whole minor thing where Mystique basically like does a whole political thing where she convinces people to allow her to do this.
Yeah.
So then Xavier and Magneto are freaking out. They're like, we're losing our power, our stranglehold on the council, basically. So what they decide to do is try to bring in Emma Frost to be their next confidant. But then Emma's like, fuck you guys. Yeah. Like, you lied to all of us about their origins, and you didn't tell us about Moira.
Which I find incredibly ironic. Coming from her.
Oh, ironic. I thought you said erotic.
Yeah. No, not erotic. Ironic. Coming from her, like, oh, how dare you lie to me, Emma?
That's your whole shtick.
Like, in fact, I think it might be one of your offshoot mutant powers, is that you just lie to people.
Yeah, you have telepathy, you turn diamond, and you lie. Yeah. Which, I mean, the whole point of Krakoa was supposed to be like, we're finally all coming together, no more, at least for the Quiet Council, like, no more secrets, we're all...
But it was gonna fall apart.
Oh,
like,
100%.
I mean, when Hickman first did this, and I looked at the council, and I was like, oh, how is this gonna fall apart?
Well, even like, the way they portray Xavier, every time Hickman would write him and then he had an artist draw him, he always looked evil as hell.
Yeah.
Like, always looked evil as hell. Like, it was nuts. So basically what happens is Mystique and Mystique and Destiny are like, okay, we gotta kill Moira, because fuck her. So they plan to have Orcus grab them. Meanwhile, in Orcus, Nimrod and all the machines kind of go, you know what? We're the future. Like, we the reasons why mutants are so afraid of us is because not only do we hate mutants, we hate humans, and we're going to take over. So basically, like, they go, let's just try to go take over now. So then you have Xavier and Magneto versus Nimrod and Omega Sentinel, which Xavier is like, why are you here? Like, you have no hope here. Meanwhile, Mystique and Destiny capture Moira, and it looks like they're going to kill her, but they can't kill her, because if you kill her, it resets the entire timeline, and then it goes into a whole nother thing. So what they do instead is they get rid of her mutant power. They use a gun that apparently Forge made, like, 50 years ago type of thing, that was supposed to be, taken away. But they use it on her, which gets rid of her power, which essentially, this is the timeline now. We're set in this timeline of mutantdom. And so it looks like they were gonna then kill Moira, but then it turned out Cypher, when he was setting up the island of Krakoa and integrating with it, put Warlock throughout the entire island, so he knew exactly what was happening the entire time. So then he goes and stops Mystique and Destiny and goes, hey, she's a human now, so technically it's illegal for you to kill her, so you can't kill her.
Yeah.
So then they have to let Moira go, and then you go in a whole different storyline that way. Meanwhile, Xavier and Magneto get absolutely blasted by Nimrod and Omega Sentinel. They manage to take out like Omega Sentinel, but then she depowers Magneto, which allows Nimrod to kill him. So then you have basically like their greatest fear, which is the machines are taking over. Meanwhile, on Krakoa, so they get revived, but then Emma Frost was like, guess what? I'm in charge now, bitch. And she basically tells the whole Quiet Council what they did, which was basically hide Moira and lie about the origins of Krakoa and whatnot. So now you have this status quo of everybody knows about Moira. In the end, it didn't matter because the island's just going to keep going the way it was.
Yeah.
But then you still... like basically what happened was Hickman basically just ended his storyline.
Yeah.
But everybody else is...
But said, okay, you can keep playing
just do whatever you
sandbox
want.
that
I built you a bunch of toys.
Yeah.
You can play with my toys now, type of thing. Yeah. And I really felt like him using Moira, it almost felt like as a metaphor for him as part of the X-Men.
Yeah.
The fact that Moira didn't die, she just got depowered, to me felt like what happened with Hickman, where it's basically like you were the guy, but then they just took away your power, and then now you're just floating around, and vibing. It was kind of sad. Where it's like you said, you could tell Hickman had this crazy plan. You knew in the long run he was gonna nail it because he always does, and then they just kind of just gets depowered, and that's the end of it.
Well, she's apparently having a bit of a revenge in the Eve of Judgment.
Okay, that's cool.
Because she's teamed up with the Eternals.
Oh no!
And has explained to the Eternals exactly how everything works with Krakoa.
Oh no!
And so they've got that leg up of knowing, okay, so we take out the 5 and then there's no resurrection and then they're hooped.
Yeah.
So it's like she's certainly having her
comeback.
Her comeback. But it just, like, for me again, it was just coming out of the X of Swords. Like I said, I've read the first 2 graphic novels for the Reign of X, and it's just been kind of like meh.
Yeah.
Like there's not a lot there. They've got 2 new events that are coming out. One that's a crossover with Spider-Man apparently.
Okay.
And then the other one was The Sins of Sinister.
Oh, okay. I'm super hyped for that.
So whatever that's gonna end up being, and apparently the way that they worded what it's supposed to be about, it sounds very much like Age of Apocalypse, but Sinister 1.
Wow, that's rad.
So I don't know. Take it for what it is. I don't know how that's gonna land. The unfortunate thing is like writers who I thought were really like. Sinister's, like, he's fun. Don't get me wrong. I like the way his goofy craziness is kind of interesting, which started with, I think it was Gillian that first wrote in Uncanny X-Men Volume 2. It took him to this like kind of silly version of himself.
Yeah.
But I do miss the original Inferno Sinister, because he was just diabolically evil.
Yeah.
And just terrifying. Whereas this one's just like more terrifying because like he could like literally push the button.
He would, just for fun.
Yeah, just for fun.
Yeah.
Just to see what it did. So it'll be interesting to see what they do. But the person I felt like wrote him the best is now on Amazing Spider-Man, and there is no Hellions.
Yeah, Zeb Wells. Yeah. Which was sad, because Hellions was my favorite comic for a long time. The one thing I'm excited for, though, is in Hoxpox, there was one minor storyline, which was the Cardinal, and I can't remember the other girl, but where basically Sinister mixed a bunch of mutant powers and made new mutants, and that was one of the coolest things.
Yeah.
So maybe that's what they're leading up to, is he's going to start just experimenting and mixing and matching mutants.
Yeah.
And it's just going to be like, we have to go fight our weird clone people now, maybe?
Yeah.
I don't know.
It's interesting because it's like I would say it's been a long time since, and I wonder if they'll ever go back to this, especially the way that their things are playing out right now. Will they ever go back to the X-Men being superheroes?
I mean,
because they're not superheroes right now.
Well, so I was gonna ask. So, like you said, you're reading Reign of X, but that's before Hellfire Gala.
Yeah.
So after Hellfire Gala is when they go back to being superheroes.
Yeah.
So basically, what happened is Cyclops goes like, you know what, we're going back to point one, which is
gotta go back
X-Men.
to our roots. Yeah.
And that's when they do the whole vote of like who's gonna be in power. So I will admit, if you read X-Men post Hellfire Gala, it's very superhero-y.
Yeah, but a lot of the other titles, like I mean, it's mainly the like this stick that they are just hammering on now is we're mutants and people want to kill us.
Yeah.
And that's really like all of our adversaries just want to kill us because they're racist, they hate mutants, and they're just coming for us. Like there's nothing else there. It's just like, and to me that's like, okay, you're not really superheroes, you're just defending yourselves. Yeah. That's all you're doing. So I mean, it was good to see that return to roots a little bit. And I don't mean like return to roots, like, hey, get back in Xavier's school and you can do that. I mean, be a writer and be creative and come up with a way that they go back to being, because outside of these events that they've been involved in, where they get involved in and be superheroes a little bit, they really have just been like on the defense.
Well, so I think that's kind of the next conversation is like, what do we want out of the X-Men series going forward now that Hickman's kind of done with it? I mean, he's been done with it for a little bit now, but and again, we both agree that Hickman's part in all of it was great. What he set up with and how he established it was great. It's kind of sad how he left off, but maybe he'll come back.
The letdown was I didn't get to see him finish it.
Yes, which maybe he'll come back after Axe or something like that and finish it, but we'll see what happens. But what I really want out of X-Men, and what I really wanted out of X-Men during the entire time, was I want a new generation of mutants that come up during Krakoa era. Because now you have a whole potential generation that's like, I've lived on this island my whole life.
Or a good portion of it.
Yeah. What have I learned? What am I good at combat or not? Because like the thing about the X-Men again was always like, we're all mutants. We come to school, but we're all influenced by human culture. I'm a goth, or like I'm the nerd, I'm the jock. But like, what if you had a mutant that was just raised in Krakoan culture of like their own language and their own everything? Like, I'd be fascinated to have a storyline about that. But what it seems like they're still doing is still talking about Wolverine and Beast and Cyclops. Like, how are they still interacting within this new status quo?
Yeah, and it's very hard to get. I think it's very hard to get away from that in the sense of like they've tried it with various iterations of the X-Men to some extent, but you've seen a more hardcore turn with like Avengers teams and stuff where they've gone like, okay, everybody's tired of Captain America and Iron Man and Thor, so let's like really mix up the team. Well, maybe have one of them, but other than that, it's just the whole of the team. And it's been very hit and miss because, again, you think of the Avengers, you think of Captain America, Thor, and Iron Man.
Yeah.
You think of X-Men, you think of, depending on which era, were you 80s or 90s, did you grow up with like, okay, it's, let's say late 70s, early 80s, it was definitely, the originals. Past that, it was like the Colossus and the Wolverine and the Nightcrawler era. And then since then, it's been very muddled because they really haven't given a good run with another set of mutants to say, even if you took, and I think that's what they're kind of trying to do with the other the X-Men title now, is like they got the mainstays of like Jean Grey and Cyclops, and then they're trying to say like, let's bring some other mutants in that have not been the faces of X-Men and see if we can kind of recreate that kind of thing we got with the Wolverine and the Colossus and whatnot. Yeah. And it's just not landing because the from what I've seen and what I have read thus far, the focus still seems to be too much on the characters that are mainstay characters. You don't really get to see, okay, like Sync, interesting character, interesting power sets, but again, they brought Sunfire in, did nothing with them. Polaris comes in, okay. Like you didn't do anything with them.
No.
Right? And that was the thing with how they brought in Wolverine. And not only were they interesting and cool kind of characters, but they just said, okay, like Cyclops is going to be there, but he's not going to be the overpowering front guy. These other X-Men are going to lead the charge. And then eventually he left. Yeah. Like it didn't take long and he left. And then it was just these guys. So, I mean, you gave them a good breadth of time to establish themselves as characters and you get people to understand who they are and why you should like them. But it just seems like now it's just so knee-jerk. It's like, oh, this isn't taking off after 5 issues. Yank. Yeah. Let's put another team out there. and they just keep churning them over, and it's like I can't like something that you're not allowing me time to like.
Yeah, because they literally are already changing the X-Men team.
Yeah.
They had a Hellfire Gala 2, and it's already changed people, which drives me nuts. It's like, because the team they had was so interesting potentially, right? So what do you want coming out of this? Like, do you want Krakoa to break apart? Do you want them to kind of like integrate back into human society? Like, what do you kind of hoping comes out of all this?
I'm okay with the Krakoa thing. Like, I don't know. Like, in all honesty, looking at that, like, without a mind warping, changing event like Secret Wars, I don't know how you reset it. How do you come back from having your own nation?
Yeah, unless Eternals like wipe them out, you know?
I just don't understand that. I think it's I don't like the I'm over the resurrection thing, like, because to me it just really takes, like, it seemed like they hit a period where they were just like, let's just randomly kill X-Men because we could just bring them back, so who cares?
Yeah.
So like you were just killing them. Like, how many times did Kid Omega die? Like,
every issue.
Like, oh my god, like, poor guy. Probably deserved it to some extent, but like they need to get rid of that, because there's just no, like, I don't like, every time they go out on a mission or they're fighting something, like, I'm like,
there's no stakes.
Yeah, there's no stakes. So I'd like to see them get rid of that aspect of it, because to me it's just like it takes away. I did like the split of the X-Men, in the sense you had the Krakoa, you had the group on Araco or Mars. And I hope they come back to that to some extent, because there's obviously two ideologies at work here that are obviously going to come into conflict. I think you give it a little more time, you're going to find those villains finding their legs and finding a way to screw this up, because they're, power hungry or whatever, especially somebody like Sinister, who I honestly don't think he cares about anything that's going on. He's just like, oh, you want me on the council? Sure. I don't know why. like, you guys are morons, but sure, and keep the dialogue going with his cape. He loves his capes. But it just, I would just like to see them get back to being, instead of just like Krakoan politics and rescuing other mutants that are around the world and bringing them to settle in, and now go out and be a part of the world, in the sense of like, be superheroes or get involved in those events and those kinds of things. And let's get over the trope of like, everybody hates you and they're coming for you. Like, we get it. Let's get back to some familiar roots of superheroism, and like, there's a bad thing, not necessarily a bad mutant, a bad thing, and the X-Men go to deal with it.
Yeah, I think that would be another cool thing they could do, is like, what if they like had a couple mutants on the Avengers, right, as like a diplomatic symbol, right?
Yeah.
Like, you could have a couple mutants like, we're still Krakoan and whatnot, but we will help you guys out in world scale events, kind of like Empire, like, just stuff like that.
Yeah.
Like kind of like what you're saying. I agree. So yeah, any final thoughts on Hickman's era as head of X?
Head of X. I thought the premise and the idea of the possibilities that he unwrapped with what he was doing with the Hawks box was very fascinating. I felt like it kind of dragged a little bit, because I felt like between Hawks box and X of Swords, it was really just like, hey, every issue seemed to be, we're just going out and we're getting mutants that are in trouble or need to come to the island, or it was like political crap that was going on the island. It just didn't really go anywhere. And then you get to the first event, and the event was kind of, I'm going to call it a flop, because I liked 25% of it.
Yeah.
30% of it.
It's not a passing grade.
It's not a passing grade. So then you're moving into the next phase, and then it gets to Inferno, and now he's just, bailed out. It's just like, it's unfortunate that we didn't get to see the full extent of what he wanted to do. Because I think there was really something there. There was a lot of potential for some interesting things that wouldn't end with the fall of Krakoa, and the mutants going back to just normal standards. Like, I think they really could just keep the island thing going for a while.
Yeah.
Which I'm not opposed to, but I'm just scared to see where it's going to go now that Hickman's moved off.
Yeah.
And you have these non-established writers who may surprise you. They may turn around and produce some really good stuff, but they haven't done it so far. So I don't have a lot of faith.
Yeah. So yeah, that's the our thoughts on Jonathan Hickman's run as head of X. Let us know in the comments what you thought, and yeah, make sure to like and follow us wherever you get your podcasts. We'll see you next time.
See you next time.